me. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to have him on camera here with me while we're talking, but show him some love as we continue through this topic and as we go along through this discussion about sustainability. I want to invite you to use the Ask a Question Q&A tool on your screen. If you hear something that piques your interest, I will try to keep one eye on that. And if you have any questions along the way, I'll try to incorporate those into our discussion or maybe a Q&A here at the end. So with all that introduction, make sure to give Gene some love in the Q&A section, and we'll go ahead and jump into this. Gene, happy to be hosting this discussion with you today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about your journey through healthcare and your current role there at UCSF?
Sure. Good morning. Well, first of all, I spare you the hardship of having to look at my face at 6 o'clock in the morning from the West Coast here because of technical challenges, but I think we'll get on just fine. My journey in healthcare is kind of a very circuitous path, somewhat interesting. I'm sure like many folks here, I started out in the clinical arena. I was a surgical technologist for a couple of years and faced with the classic question of go down and help SPD at the particular hospital I was at in Pasadena, California, back in a time so long ago I don't like to admit, and I liked it, and I stayed in the SPD side of things, and was fascinated with how to make that better than it was, and spent a lot of years so I'm a Mustang, like many people. I started out on the ground through all of the roles as a lead tech and as a supervisor and a manager, and I've been a director. But my path took a different direction about 20 years ago, where I transitioned into administration for perioperative services, particularly with computer technology and systems. So I have a deep knowledge of information systems management, as well as sterile processing, making me uniquely suited to eventually travel into the world of sterile processing information systems. And I was at one point the director of implementation for materials management microsystems, which is SPM now under Steris, and moved through that into the world of consulting and was a professional services consultant for PricewaterhouseCoopers, taking me about as far away from sterile processing as you think you could go. However, I was in the healthcare unit in business services consulting to actually help hospitals in peri-op and in SPD and supply chain in that particular vertical of business consulting services under a Big Four firm. Eventually starting my own firm and running for a number of years a consulting firm as a managing partner. And, you spend a decade of your life doing that, and it opens up other opportunities, and you also will come to the point where you want to sleep in your own bed every night. So a few years ago, I made the transition to UCSF from being a consultant for them to being a permanent entity. That meaning I had already worked for the University of California at UCLA, so it made a lot of economic sense for me on a number of levels to go back to the University of California for my tenure, involving, retirement and other things. Anyway, but the job itself is why I am currently the senior project manager for the sterile processing division. I have functioned as the interim director a couple of times there. I am fortunate to be partnered with the operations system-wide director of sterile processing, who is both an infection control nurse by background and a operating room nurse by background. So between her skill set and experience and mine, we have a very unique leadership profile as far as our viewpoint, perspectives, what we can put into action for a very large organization with multiple campuses. And right. We have a fairly large leadership team, including 2 educators. So that's something that I can speak well to my institution's investment in success with having the right people in the right places, doing a lot of stuff that's very sophisticated, taking us into a realm of being a top flight organization. And so my role today is mostly program management. In other words, I deal a great deal with the tools and technologies, the enablement of all of the processes to be able to have our operational staff in sterile processing be successful. So that's information technology, but it's also building out expansion campuses and replacement hospitals for right. our organization, which is really the center of our topic today, to talk about equipment selection. I have done a lot of that. I have been part of a lot of construction projects and expansion and launch projects for organizations. Like currently we have, which is why we have such a large leadership team and need a senior project manager for our sterile processing division, because we have multiple campuses and we're growing. So I have currently multiple projects either in planning or in flight that are expansion satellite facilities like surgery centers in the region, as well as a very large renovation of our existing sterile processing at our main campus, which is the Helen Diller Medical Center on Parnassus Avenue. And then I have a replacement project for that medical center where we're building a replacement tower that will open in 2030. So it's the new hospital at Parnassus Heights. So all of the questions that we're going to kind of field today are very relevant and very current in what we're working on.
No, that's awesome.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it sounds like based on your experience in the field, UCSF, I'm sure is lucky and pleased to have you there. The role of senior project manager over sterile processing operations is not one that's commonly heard of in the industry, particularly for folks who are at a smaller healthcare facility than what you're at. And so just to summarize and kind of position that, would you say that your primary role is overseeing a lot of the like construction projects and performance improvement, like bringing in new pieces of equipment and new technology to help improve the operations for the system? Is that a good summary?
Well, to a certain extent, there are other project managers in design and construction that deal with the actual commission of construction and its execution that I partner with. My job is technology enablement with an eye towards the future. So we're looking at current state. So I do a lot of, like, I have oversight of our SPD information systems, that portfolio of software, because it's more than just one application and we've got things integrated, in keeping technology enablement moving forward there. Best use. I do a lot with informatics as far as KPIs and performance indicators of various types to show that we have optics on where we are and where we're headed. And a lot of what we're doing as far as future state planning is strategic. So I'm involved in the visioning and design of SPDs for our campuses. And we have 3 inpatient campuses, and I have, I want to say, 4 currently either a satellite SPD campuses under our oversight. So that's 7 SPDs, and there's like 2 more coming online in the next 18 months. That's how big our division is. Volume of production overall is like comparable to Cleveland Clinic or Mass General or any of the large academic medical centers.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And particularly the way that you interface with informatics and data and intelligence and tracking where we're headed and looking towards the future and all of those things. Very important topic for what we're going to be talking about today. So you shared with us what your journey through sterile processing looks like, how you ended up where you're at today, what your role looks like today. But can you tell me, like, what has piqued your interest, particularly in this topic of sustainable healthcare practices, particularly in the sterile processing department or in the operating room?
Well, it can be said that the mission of sterile processing is to have the right item at the right place and time and in an acceptable condition for use and at an appropriate cost basis. And I think that sums it up fairly well for pretty much anyone working in our field. That we're trying to do this intelligently, effectively. And then for decades, we've been told to do more with less, which is that lean thinking that, we've been beaten down with for years, right? And lean thinking, it's been a part of our business practices probably since the late 1980s. And it can be narrowly defined as the elimination of waste. And I think that sustainability is all about using our resources wisely and also within the context of environmental stewardship. And that's the key takeaway. Like, doing less in the best context means minimizing waste, like I said. And in the Toyota lean vernacular, waste equals muda. And we can talk about that in a broader sense beyond just an action that does not add value, which is the traditional viewpoint of waste in lean thinking. But lean equals green. And, this is something that's coming to the forefront of pretty much everything we do in healthcare for a number of reasons. It's not going to go away. This is not just a buzzword like, we need to look at and say, oh boy, let's tick a box. This is something that's going to be deeply and broadly integrated into the world we inhabit, for the future. And sustainability is critically important. It's not just, oh, let's have some electric cars and save some water, And I think it's accurate to describe it as a form of lean thinking. It's just at another level. And like for me, I work in an organization that's clearly an early adopter and an innovator. So these concepts are driven at a very high level of commitment and governance within the university. So they're enforced here as a matter of policy. And I guess you could say that, it's a kind of program that has a lot of facets.
For sure. And you've kind of teased that sustainability topic for us a little bit and told us particularly what it's not. I mean, it's bigger than the electric cars and saving some water, and it's related to lean operations. But maybe we should start with just some definitions. Could you give us a bit of an overview of what sustainability means to you in the sterile processing and OR environment,
Sure.
particularly when it comes to equipment selection, because that's kind of your wheelhouse, I would imagine, as the project manager.
Yeah, and I handle other aspects of this that I can define. But again, for our topic today, we're really focused on equipment selection. I deal with other programs that surround sustainability that touch on it. But I think it's pretty widely recognized that healthcare in general has a very heavy carbon footprint, both on what we consume and then also what we put into the waste stream. And in general terms, sustainability can be broken down into like 3 overarching categories. There's the consumption-related aspects of what we do in sterile processing and the operating. So that's the inputs to the process. Now, with regard to our topic, that's the use of, energy and utilities, particularly water. Water is a big one, and then we'll talk about that in greater detail. Like washer disinfectors and sterilizers consume about 15% of the total amount of water used in a typical hospital. And I can tell you that the greater user, of course, is dietary. But that's a substantial chunk of the water consumption rate of a facility for one department. And also, the other thing we're putting into the waste stream, chemistries, the biodegradability of the chemistries and materials we're using with our washers. And that also touches on high-level disinfection as far as disinfectants, et cetera. That's something that comes under sustainability. And materials. So, we won't really talk about this. I think there's others that will talk about this today. But, are we using wrap versus containers? And is there a recycling program for the wrap and things like that, okay? There's also the logistics related to sustainability, and that's the impacts created by the process. And I think, again, not really kind of what we're going to talk about in this segment, but the cost of transport of goods processed, like on-site versus off-site processing, the carbon footprint of those trucks is something that is calculable. And that becomes a factor for some organizations to consider in their decision-making processes. Again, a little bit outside of what we're going to talk about right now. And then there's the waste stream management aspects, which I think is probably something that a lot of people are more familiar with, meaning the outputs of our process. So the trash, if you will, or the consumption of single-use devices. We've got things as far as initiatives, as far as diversion for recycling, synthetic wrap, like, Halyard, for example, and I'm sure Medline and others who produce a lot of wrap have recycling programs where you put it in a specific bin in the OR and it gets sent off to a plant and it's remade into other products that are reused for synthetic wrap. And then you've got the renewal of single-use devices, again, kind of off topic for what we're going to be speaking to, but companies like Stryker, Sterile Med, and Medline that have renewal programs for, pressure cuts and SCD sleeves and things like that. There's a lot of that out there, which is generally more in the OR, but in my organization, because of space constraints, some of that actually comes down to SPD, and it's picked up there. So there's more to the concept of sustainability than just these dimensions. And the thing I can tell you is that according to the United Nations World Commission on Environmental and Development, sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it focuses on ensuring environmental, social, and economic practices that can be sustained for years to come by using methods, systems, and materials that won't deplete the resources or harm the natural cycles of the environment. And I think that that's a really interesting and important way to define and frame up what the overall expectations or the goal of sustainability is. It's not about money per se. It's about using what we need and not taking more than we need to be able to do this effectively. Sterile Corporation actually speaks to the four pillars to fulfill a commitment to creating a sustainable future. And so they speak to it, and I think these dimensions are relevant for all of us, especially equipment selection. Environmental stewardship, people and communities, health and safety, and ethical business practices. So those four dimensions can create the framework of what we need to look at as far as the decision making that we have and how it's going to affect the ecosystem, within our organization, within our community, and globally. So overall, if you just think about it, sustainability is a very nuanced equation, and there are many interrelated processes or steps that need to be accounted for in the math surrounding decisions, whether that's equipment selection or the decision of using a single use versus a reusable device, okay? And there's different factors based on the geographic location, the risk scores for patient safety or employee safety, the production frequency and volumes, the tolerance based upon end user expectations, all of these things. And for this discussion, like I said, we're mostly focusing on processing equipment related aspects to the subject.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for sharing that complex definition. So what you're telling me is it's not as easy as just looking at the Energy Star rating on the new sterilizer and picking one with the best score and slapping it in the department.
No.
I think that discussion around logistics is particularly interesting because that gets into more of an operations standpoint. You mentioned offsite processing, but I would imagine even like within a facility, if you construct your sterile processing department 2 buildings over from your OR, you're going to have to think whether it's through robotics or through manual labor and, double the amount of case carts you otherwise would have needed. All of the processes and products that you need to buy just to be able to transport things back and forth and keep operations running smoothly. So I appreciate you giving us that perspective as well, that sustainability is bigger than an Energy Star score, and often it has to do with location and risk and logistics and all of those things. So as we think about sustainability then, particularly related to equipment selection, like how much should sustainability claims have an impact on the decision-making process on what we're going to buy and where we're going to put it? Like, is this the top priority, or I guess how does it impact your decision?
Well, let's put it this way. I think now I've been doing, equipment selection and build-outs, either replacement or expansion facilities, for over a decade. And it's probably, now being heightened more in organizations as far as the decision-making process than it has in the past, particularly in the Western United States. Now, I'm in California, so, the carbon footprint and water consumption are very, very important to us, particularly. Go to Nevada and build a hospital, or Arizona right now, that's going to be at the top of your list as far as, well, what are the consumption rates? And again, sustainability. What happens when, they're setting limitations or ration on water, consumption, and you're going to be penalized because the carbon footprint of that is something that we can't sustain, And, that's a very controversial topic if you go to Phoenix right now about is there enough water, or to go to Las Vegas, there's people fighting about the Colorado River and water rights and things like that, which I think is way outside the topic we have today, but it's a factor. And the thing is, equipment sustainability is a balance between the various costs and whether they lie in the carbon footprint calculation or in actual dollars. So does it always come down to cost? I don't like to think so, but I think there are a lot of people who would speculate, not inaccurately, that sometimes it seems like, that's where it all comes down to in the end. The gotta have versus the nice to have. And, well, here's the thing. Sustainability as far as consumption management of materials, particularly water, again, is a big one, or electrical in some cases. Those are no longer a nice to have. They've become a gotta have. And I'll give you an example. I have a project to replace existing equipment, which is probably 15 years into its life cycle. So it's end of life cycle, particularly for the high volume environment that this equipment is located. All of this equipment had water saver capability, even when it was deployed in, the late, 2011, something like that. It had been around for a while before they'd actually deployed it. But none of that equipment had the water saver technology deployed with it, although it was an option. Today, that's not an option.
Right.
So the other thing to think about too, and a lot of people don't realize this, ideally these decisions, they need to be a win-win. But what does that entail? Well, first of all, there's a score around sustainability. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with this term. You've probably seen or heard it, but maybe you're not really familiar with it. There's the term LEED, L-E-E-D. So LEED compliance in facility design is now a driver. Particularly, I've worked on projects for new expansion hospitals or replacement hospitals for over a decade on both coasts. So in the Midwest, on the East Coast, in the Southeast, in the West Coast, LEED has come up in every one of those facilities. Oh, it's a LEED building. And, I think a lot of us don't really necessarily know what that means. But LEED facility design stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. So it's a framework for rating a building's design against a set of very well-defined criteria established by the U.S. Green Building Council. It's a point system. And that point system is used to define the sustainability of the organization on multiple levels, like based on the materials used in the building, based on the HVAC system, based on the water consumption of all of the devices, et cetera, and we're a piece of that. And so that's part of the carbon footprint that's calculated. And it's growing. Like there are other initiatives like this.
That's really interesting. So are you saying that there may be some facilities folks out there who are keeping track of this LEED building score and, getting brownie points or demerits credited or taken from them based on the equipment that's in the facility? And so when it comes to equipment selection and sustainability, we ought to be broadening the number of people that we talk to and bringing in those stakeholders so that they could speak into the importance and how much they care about those kinds of LEED credits and things like that?
Absolutely. Without question, that is the case. And at this point, from a governance standpoint, when it comes to, design and construction of new hospitals or replacement hospitals or renovations of existing departments, it's not done in a vacuum. The
Right.
days of that happening are long over. From inception to in place, you have a multi-stakeholder group required to be able to accomplish those tasks. And if you look at that from the perspective of who needs to be in those conversations, well, the sustainability assessment is part of the process of visioning. And it's also informing the design process for any major capital construction project. So there's going to be inclusion of that language in the RFP process, when you're doing vendor selection, again, developing a sense of what your expectations are versus, so you're setting requirements, and then getting responses from your vendors in the RFP of how they're going to meet your requirements. But most organizations also now have, I'd say, a highly defined sustainability committee of some form, and those stakeholders need to be included in some of these decisions, and generally are, particularly like you're going to have people from procurement, facilities, design and construction experts, both internal and external. In the capital projects I work on, we usually have both our internal design and construction experts. We have, because it's a university, some campus people that are involved in the conversation, even if they're just simply informed. And we tend to have architects and specialists that are deep subject matter experts at this, that get involved with us. And I'm probably, in a unique case, one of the subject matter experts from the steel processing side that doesn't just get the cursory, okay, so here's what we're going to build for you, take it and like it. I get more involved in those conversations than, say, steel processing managers, because that's my focus, and also because I have the time to devote to that. whereas a manager who's in the day-to-day whirlwind of operations doesn't necessarily have the ability to break stride and deeply think through all of the impacts here. That's really also the responsibility of all of these experts in the design and construction and planning fields. So equipment planners are really hip to this, and architects, in my experience in the last, say, 4 or 5 years, are deeply involved with understanding, what this is. And I have campus entities that are part of certain types of initiatives within the entire University of California system covering the state that want to know. I've been contacted multiple times about multiple projects I have in flight, with them asking me, okay, so what about your carbon footprint? And this is from the people that are the carbon footprint police, we'll call them, and they're like, hey, what's going on with all of this? And I'm like, okay, well, and even they have been proactive in reaching out to me. Well, I see that you have these machines and there's a water saver system, and why isn't that deployed? And I'm like, okay, first of all, yes, I am aware of that. That decision was made before my tenure, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, we are in flight of the planning and just getting ready for the execution of replacement of this equipment. And what we are replacing it with is X, and we are replacing it, and this is the specifications that we're, as far as consumption, that we're now going to be moving toward, which are far superior to the existing in place incumbent equipment that's legacy at this point, even with its water saver features. And so I can say, to some point, I've held them at bay, but really it's in partnership. I mean, I say that in jest. These are folks that they have a deep commitment. This is their job. This is what they're tasked with doing, is keeping us honest, being the conscious of our sustainability. And their conscience about that is long-term, and water being a factor. It's funny how quickly mentality and viewpoints change. 2 years ago, if we were having this conversation, we're like, oh my God, we're in a drought in California, and, this is horrible. And, oh yeah, of course you've got to do this. And there'd be a lot of executive support for that all over the place. Okay. Well, the last 2 winters we've had the Pineapple Express. So, the water has hit the mountains, and we've gotten snowpack and all this, and it's refilled some of the aquifers and all that. And so everybody's drawing a sigh of relief and okay, business as usual. And I'm like, no, this is a mistake. You've got a respite for a couple of years, but we have the worst drought on the Western U.S. in 1,200 years, according to the science people that do, soil testing, et cetera, and, archaeology or whatever, the experts. They're saying this is bad. Okay. So we had a little bit of a break, but this is going to come right back to it. So this is not now the time to ease off the gas pedal on driving this bus,
Right.
And I think that a lot of organizations see that. Now, internationally, we're talking about geography here. Internationally, some territories, such as France, have now mandated that hospitals, this is a mandate, so it's a law. Hospitals are required to draw up a balance sheet for their greenhouse gas emissions, and they calculate the carbon footprint of the CSSD. So there's an actual tally score for every department in your hospital, particularly public hospitals in France. They're required to do this. I'm sure that England, the National Health Trust is probably doing similar things. The Germans, the entire EU is probably moving along this line, as they're kind of a bit ahead of us. And Canada has this, where it's becoming a requirement. It's not a nice to have; it's a gotta have. And as we look further into refining sustainability, there's going to be an increasing focus on the lessons learned both inside and outside the healthcare setting, because we are such a heavy carbon footprint user. And where can we learn lessons from other areas, sectors, and industries? A good example for everyone to consider is the textile linen processing business. They're the biggest water user. So, for all the goods that, scrubs and bed linens and bath blankets and towels and everything else, that requires an astronomical amount of water to process. It's generally done in a third-party contract. It's companies like Sodexo and various others that escape the top of my head right now that do that work, that are deeply involved in not only the requirements to provide linen that's not going to be infectious or cause problems for our patients or cause problems for us as employees wearing surgical scrubs, but they've got techniques that they've developed as far as having more efficient equipment and chemistries that have less risk to the environment as far as impact. things like that. That's one of the first places that people had to look at, from a design standpoint, from R&D, what can we do? And from a chemical design standpoint, what do we need to do as far as chemistries to make them less impactful to the environment? And you see a lot of that. So there's just, and consider part of this conversation, the decision-making factors about equipment selection also go down to the chemistries you're consuming in your washer disinfectors and part washers.
Right.
And there's a lot around that. And there are a lot of companies that are, putting out, a lot of detail about what they're doing to change their chemistries to make them more eco-friendly.
Yeah, we can definitely learn from one another. As you were talking about the importance of involving stakeholders and that well-formed sustainability council that's there to partner with you and help you see the big picture, we're talking about, in California at a very large health system. What about a listener who is in West Virginia at a standalone ambulatory surgical center, right? And there's not a ton of support. Are there any resources out there or people they should connect with in order to make sure that they're making smart equipment decisions from a sustainability perspective?
Yes, there are. Now, it's becoming rarer and rarer that you see like standalone surgery centers or standalone hospitals, but yes, they still exist. A lot of smaller, like rural critical access hospitals and things like that are partnered, and they're part of a larger, if you will, an IDN of some form, like LifePoint or one of the, there's probably resources within their corporate structure. But if you're at a standalone surgery center, doctor owned, in Tennessee or something, reach out to the community, because the state or the county may have A, opportunity, and B, subject matter experts that can help with the planning. A lot of that, like, if you have an existing facility or department, it's different from a new one. If you're going to build a new place from the ground up, like a surgery center, you might need to have a certificate of need from the state, county, or city that you're in. So there's probably someone vetting some of that. Like, here's what you got to do. But even your local energy or water supplier is a good source of information. Like, particularly in like areas where drought is more of an issue, and that isn't restricted solely to the Western United States. Atlanta, Georgia can have problems. There's parts of Georgia that struggle with water certain years and things like that. So resilience is important, and there are people within the Department of Water and Power that provide those utilities to you that do that work and can give you at least guidance on, well, ideally, here's what you want, like here's what your water consumption certainly costs. We calculate all that out. We calculate the cost of water utilities, the cost of electric utilities in kilowatt hours, all of that. And that's part of, sometimes the decision-making process, because you put it in an RFP that, you want that information, and pretty much all of the design cut sheets for construction from every large vendor of equipment will provide you with their per unit per cycle and standby consumption rates. So those are the people you can go after to provide help if you don't have any internal help, particularly if you're a standalone, say, for-profit surgery center that you're working at. The challenge is when it comes to equipment transition. We'll talk about probably, a little bit more here as we get into this, but the easiest way to get highly sustainable equipment is a clean slate opportunity right now, like a new build, net new, or net replacement for a tower. We're gonna, and I've done this, where we build a new tower next to the building, and we, walk out of the old SPD on Friday and come up in the new SPD on Monday, and everything's brand new, and all the old equipment is, either decommissioned or remarketed or repurposed elsewhere, generally decommissioned because it's probably end of its life cycle. Those are really easy projects to make sure that you're current with the times as far as your selection of equipment that is going to be eco-friendly. And the next category would be you're in a renovation project in place, and you're going to replace net new for equipment that's end of life cycle. And the most challenging environment would be, there are organizations that love to keep their equipment well past its expiration date. And I have many examples of this. I'm sure many of us all do, there's some small hospital and they have a sterilizer in the basement that's got torpedo doors. It looks like a torpedo tube. It's from 1960. And it's like, come on, guys, really? Like I think this deserves retirement, oh, no, it still works, those are the most challenging ones to be able to say, hey, come on. And in some territories, it depends on where you are geographically. Now, we're talking really about the United States and North America, and it's a lot easier here. But in places like, Pakistan, for example, or India, and other developing nations, Africa, they're challenged with even having sterilizers, much less replacing them for lean and green machines, where they're probably sorely needed as well.
Yeah. And if you don't have one of those really old pieces of equipment that's well past the end of its life cycle, just ask your service repair tech who goes around the region, and they'll tell you where it is. I've been a manager of one of those departments that he's like, there's only 10 of these left in the United States, and it's bananas that you all still have one of these. So it's just
and they're so old that they have to cannibalize parts from they have to fabricate parts for them. It's like insane.
Yep. It gets real creative when you end up in that kind of situation. So, Gene, up to this point in the conversation, we've been talking about equipment in general terms. We've talked about equipment. I think we've mentioned the word sterilizers one time, but I guess without getting into any one particular manufacturer's products or claims, can you give us maybe some examples of some technologies out there on the market today that are accomplishing better things for sustainability than what maybe their older versions were?
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much, is it going to be one particular large-scale supplier of the big three or big four suppliers in the United States, for example, or Europe, because they're the same players? Are we going to see one like light years ahead of another? Well, the honest truth at this point, I can tell you, is probably not. I'd say that there's at least one of those that's maybe lagging behind a little bit, but they're catching up in their R&D pipeline. But I can give you a couple of things as far as specific examples, because I have charts here where I have compared like the top three manufacturers and some of the estimated consumption rates per cycle for their sterilizers, washers, and car washers. So in general, you're pretty safe to assume this. The latest generation of processing equipment from all of the major manufacturers is focused on efficiency. Each one of them has a strategy that balances consumption, quality, and outcomes. And, there's some things maybe you want to be, like, they're nuanced. It's a very complex equation. But you want to know that if the supplier, one thing to detect, if they're really giving you the truth or a bill of goods, if they're emphasizing other features rather than being transparent about the consumption rates, then there might be a concern that the proposed equipment they're offering you is not as environmentally friendly as the other potential solutions that are available, even from them, okay? I'm not saying that I deal with vendors as representatives that are going to offer me equipment that isn't like top of the line and world class in its capabilities. But I have experience in other institutions and consulting engagements where, people are cost sensitive. So the guy's giving you, well, here's the B team sterilizer or washer. It's not our primo model. This is the entry level, and it doesn't have the features that really are like have an eye towards sustainability. They're last year's model. Here's a little sterilizer that's been in rental service. There are companies that remarket old equipment too for people that are cash challenged to be able to invest. I would look at those with a very careful eye. But there's a balance in all of this. And automated washers in particular are a balance between mechanical impingement and applied chemistry as the formula for quality outcomes. And so it adds a layer of complexity to the overall equation that you need to evaluate in detail. Like, you shouldn't be looking at washers without looking at the chemistries you're going to use with them, as far as the dilution rates and then what the environmental impact of that is. And I know I'm giving probably some people here migraine headaches thinking about how hard this is to do. In fact, you got to take a while, and you got to have a number of people carefully looking at all of the information to make sure it's correct. when you're making decisions, so that you're making an informed, aggregated view of what your potential solutions are. Now, how do these pieces of equipment save water and electricity? Okay, well, let's talk about sterilizers. How sterilizers save the water, and we use a lot of water in sterilizers. It's not just steam, guys. It's the use of electric valves and electric vacuum pumps, like specialized pieces of equipment that are more in modern thinking. We also, another way you save a lot of water in a pre-vacuum sterilizer is a recirculating system for the water discharged by the equipment. That it's usually a chiller water system that uses a small amount or smaller amount of cooled water to repurpose the hot water that comes out of the sterilizer. Now, people are like, sterilizer water, what are you talking about? Okay, what a lot of people don't realize is, you know how you hear like that water running sound at all times in the back of your sterilizer if you walk in the machine room? Because those check valves are turned by water. So there's a great deal of that equipment from its design, and I'm not going to qualify myself as a design expert on steam sterilizers, but I'm around them for decades, and I know enough about them for being friends with the repair guy, to know how they basically work. And there's check valves that turn some of those valves. So there's a great deal of water consumption. And I'll give you some examples of consumption rates, but the other thing I want to point out before I do that is how washer disinfectors save water. The design plan, the strategy for those units can be about high impingement washing, so greater mechanical cleaning versus chemistry. There's some balance between, how powerful those pumps are, which has a material impact on the devices you're processing. High impingement washers, there's certain delicates can't go in there, where other low impingement washers, they can. And a lot of the high impingement washers have a delicates cycle, so they don't put as much energy, but they're going to use more chemistry and water sometimes. And that's, again, all of the flavor of their design, and how they're making these effective. The number one thing is we're not going to shirk on quality. No matter what is done to be more of an eco-friendly system, the outcome has to be the same. That TOSI has to be clean. We have to be able to demonstrate its efficacy. The sterilizer has to be, sterilizing goods. So also washers are using recirculating systems for water discharged by the equipment to be able to save water. Now, to give you some examples, and I'm not going to name any names, and none of this is about sterilizers by specific manufacturer, but I'm going to give you some idea of flavor by vintage. So, for example, a small steam sterilizer, slightly older vintage by a manufacturer, it consumes per cycle. And I'm talking about like an IUSS type sterilizer. An older machine, probably 15, 20 years vintage, typical water rate, this is on an actual device based on its specifications, 225 gallons of water per cycle and 125 pounds of steam and 7 kilowatt hours per cycle. Now, a modern equivalent, same chamber size roughly, same intent, meaning an IUSS type sterilizer, a modern one is 42 gallons of water, 24 pounds of steam and 2 kilowatts. These might not all be the same manufacturer, but you can see the
it's like a
progress being made. Yes. Now, I could go through, a medium sterilizer, same thing. 430 gallons of water, 187 pounds of steam, and then now you got the modern equivalent. It's 69 gallons of water, and it's 33 pounds of steam for a medium chamber sterilizer that's got a carton carriage. Now, large floor loading pre-vac, and this is based on an older design 15 years, 20 years ago, 800 gallons of water for a double cart loader, 375 pounds of steam, 7 kilowatt hours. Its modern equivalent, 225 gallons of water, so a 4-to-1 ratio almost, 83 pounds of steam, 4 kilowatt hours. This is the latest generation. These are the Ferraris, if you will. It's like literally looking at like a 1969 Charger versus a Tesla, it has the gas.
Right.
4 gallons to the mile, not 4 miles to the gallon, but 4 gallons to the mile,
right.
versus something that gets 25 or 30 gallons to a mile, And now washer disinfectors, same kind of calculation. 49 gallons of municipal water, 9 gallons of treated water, taking it down to 19 gallons of municipal water and 7 gallons of treated water. That's a good example of old versus new as far as vintage. And with cart washers, for cart utensil cycles, it's like 55 gallons of water and even 32 pounds of steam, because yes, you use steam in cart washers in certain designs. From that to like 8 gallons of water and 70 pounds of steam. So they're doing it a little differently in their design, particular apples to oranges comparison. But then a cart washer with an instrument washing package. Classic older one, 126 gallons of water, 42 gallons of treated water, and 95 pounds of steam. Take that down to, there's a modern unit that does an instrument washing package with 14 gallons of water, 4 gallons of treated water, and 44 pounds of steam. You'll notice that none of them all seem like the same ratio, because these are varying manufacturers with different design strategies. Some are using electric solenoid valves. Some are using a mixture of valves. Some are using other technologies like strong impingement as far as the motors that are in their machines. So, again, not saying there's any one particular vendor that's better than another. They're all headed in this direction because they have to be competitive.
Gene, you're kind of blowing my mind right now. And maybe I misheard you, or maybe I just don't have the graphic on there, but it sounded like you, by the numbers you said, that large floor loading sterilizer uses significantly a larger amount of water than a washer disinfector, like orders of magnitude greater per cycle. That is wild.
Well, look at the chamber volume. We're talking about something as far as its cubic square feet that's like, 12 or 16 cubic feet versus 4 cubic feet. So it's a 4-to-1 ratio in its size too. But as far as water consumption, and that's minus any water saver package that was available at the time that sterilizer was deployed. And this is a real world example, because I'm speaking to a sterilizer that uses 800 gallons of water that's about to be replaced. It's an existing piece of equipment I know about. Those are real numbers. And again, even, is that, a vendor issue? It's just the design constraints weren't there 20 years ago when this system was designed. And actually, this is a very old design. It's an iteration of a design that's been around since 1975. So, they're only used in the largest of physical plants.
I guess that makes sense. It's still wild to think about. Gene, we are running close on time, and I've got 20 more questions that I want to ask you, so I'm going to have to be real selective here. I think the one that our audience is going to care most about is the sterile processing kind of operations calculation. And you're in this because you started, working even at the tech level. You've, lived the sterile processing life, and now you're in that equipment selection role. So when you look at a piece of equipment, what kind of thought process do you go to when you're trying to balance the functional capability of the equipment and kind of the operational need we have, and then the sustainability claims of that equipment, and what, I guess, responsibility we have to be good stewards of our resources?
Well, first thing we're going to look at is no matter, I don't see an intersection to date where the sustainability factors have a mitigating impact negatively on the operational functionality. A lot of that is sort of like back of house, if you will, meaning it has to do with the infrastructure itself. And so here's one possible thing is, from a clean slate design of a department, we might take up a couple more feet in the ceiling or in the wall or something where we're adding equipment that is recirculating water, for example. So there's additional technology, or there's electric boilers, things like that. Sometimes these things have a meaningful impact on quality as far as replicating the process. Like, there's one vendor that, because of their recirculating system design and because they're using electric boilers as support directly for their washers and sterilizers to generate steam in-house, you can't get a wet pack. It's like virtually impossible. Okay. And so that actually provides us greater reliability and greater comfort in the outcomes but of course, then again, requiring that much more preventative maintenance and routine maintenance and care. But I'd rather have a high performance engine being well maintained than a reliable sluggish gas guzzler in my environment. It's just like we could use the cars analogy. If you go buy a classic car, it's pretty easy to work on. And I'm no expert at cars, but I know enough to be dangerous, so I hire mechanics that know what they're doing. So, like, if you bought a car from the 70s, like a Mustang from the late 60s, early 70s, it's not going to be all that hard to work on. It's not all that many parts. Now go out and buy a brand new Toyota gas hybrid, and you just open the hood and look in there and go, I don't know what all that does. Okay,
Right.
It's going to be more expensive to maintain, but it's going to get me there in a much more efficient way and more effective way. And ironically, and I think that this is true for the sterile processing part of this analogy, modern electric gas hybrid cars or full electric cars have more torque and more get-go than a lot of gas engine vehicles for whatever physics reasons that we
Right.
don't need to talk about here. But you hear that, right? And it is true from enough people I know that own, and I own a gas electric hybrid Toyota that's got more torque and power and horsepower than its gas only equivalent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the same is true for sterilizers and washers in some cases. This equipment is more efficient and more effective. Higher impingement, depending on what you're putting through the washer, higher impingement is really taking in a direction where that stuff is clean, And again, there are different schools of thought, but I don't think that any of the sustainability requirements that I've seen that are entering the heightened awareness and consciousness of hospitals is going to affect us where we're not going to be able to do our jobs as readily as we have in the past. I think it's actually the opposite.
That's really interesting. So I guess it's more of a cost calculation than like how many of these sustainability options do you want to add on? So when you're looking at that, do you always go for what you referred to earlier as like the Ferrari model, all of the green options equipped on it, or is there some kind of ROI calculation that goes into figuring out the amount of detergents we're going to have to use, or the or what's the actual value of the utilities we're going to save versus the cost of this particular add-on? Anything like that you want to share with us?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you that I'm sort of the guy that creates headaches for some of the capital equipment planners because I actually go to this level. They don't, but they do appreciate it. And there are others, or companies like St. Onge, for example, which is a capital planning company that actually has some very, very capable subject matter experts in the sterile processing field that do this, which is where I've learned some of these lessons. I mean, I didn't invent all this. A lot of it, I was, happenstance involved in a project where someone, exposed me to the notion like years ago, oh, well, you can think about your chemistry costs. And calculations for this, there's an algorithm that you would develop and use. Everybody sort of has their own. There are some standards. If you look at FGI and other organizations having that, the people that do process and systems engineering have their calculations, their standards out there if you search for them. That you get into the nuances about nice to have versus got to have, and then cost. And so, I'll give an example. All right, I have one of my facilities that we have the plans for a long-term renovation for this particular hospital, SPD, and we've got sterilizers there right now that are absolutely at their end of life cycle. They're actually at end of support, meaning they were gently used. They're in really good condition. But we had an event last year where a motherboard for one of those steam sterilizers went down. It needed to be replaced. And the supplier had to go and find a decommissioned sterilizer somewhere on the East Coast and remanufacture the board to make it compliant and viable because the parts are basically extinct. So we have an urgent project to replace those two steam sterilizers at this location, followed by a full-blown renovation that will take place, 3 or 4 years from now. So here's my point. In that decision, because of budget, capital, everything else, we are going live with replacement sterilizers, and the water chiller sustainability features, which will be built into the infrastructure, will not go live until 2 years after those sterilizers are installed and active, because of the larger renovation project. And again, the constraint being getting access to the utilities to be able to make those changes. We're putting the equipment plumbed in, if you will, but not in line. They're going to be bypassed. And in 2 years, they'll go active after that install for that reason.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine for folks who don't have all of your experience or access to resources, I'm sure that vendors have at least some rudimentary tools in terms of trying to help you calculate those ROIs. Do you find those are trustworthy and worth your time?
I have seen capital planning and throughput capacity planning reports at my current institution at UCSF from all three of the major vendors, and all of them hold water.
I love it.
Is the flavor different? I will tell you that there are subject matter experts at every large equipment supplier that know what they're talking about, that know what they're doing. The one to trust is the one that comes in and spends the most amount of time with direct observation and does calculations, because it's easy to capture specs. You know, oh, you got these sterilizers, here's what you want to go to that my company sells if I'm company B and you have company A or company C or D. But all of those people that I have encountered have given me projections on production throughput, cost, and eco-sustainability in their reports. And these are not for the faint of heart. And these are people that are not just doing this cursory. That's all they do all day long, is go to hospitals in the United States or Canada and assess. That's their job. And then they will help you plan, all that equipment. And there's particular people I can think of out there that are experts at this, particularly with sustainability.
Well, that's encouraging, because we can't all be Gene. But man, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. We had so much more that we just scratched the surface of and didn't have a chance to get into, but it was a great discussion. I really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and wrap because we are a couple minutes over, and I don't want to take a break away from our listeners. But there were a couple.
Talk about this in the future. Who knows?
Absolutely, I could see this. I could see this continuing to be a good topic for the future. If you had some questions for Gene that either you put in the chat and I didn't get to, or one that you just thought of, you will be able to connect with us either via email or LinkedIn. If you look in the speaker bio tool on your screen, you'll be able to see our contact information in there. I would encourage you to reach out and be happy to continue to have this conversation. We are going to send you off now to a brief, it looks like about a 6-minute break before the next session gets started. You don't have to go anywhere. You'll be automatically directed there, and we'll see you here in just a few minutes. Thanks, y'all.